I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia, and would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back, all on my own. There's just something about travelling the highways of the US by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's not so bad. It's basically camping in a metal tent. Makes you feel like you're really roughing it. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and doze off. No, I don't put up anything to block the windows for privacy. Maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So, for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and less quieter than truck stops. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps. Most likely travellers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I'd have more privacy there as opposed to being bathed in light. So, I did my usual thing. Locked my doors, opened the window just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. Then the sharp tap woke me up. At first I thought I heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes, a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and couldn't see anything. I hear another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree, maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe a squirrel or a bird dropped something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal? The thought occurred to me there might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes. The keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. Still, I lay there, completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything, hoping whoever it was that they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. Still, the tapping continued. I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making the noise. So that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through my entire body. Every muscle fibre locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. There in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone, I presume to be a woman, was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. The nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making, in that instant, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I reversed as fast as I could, trying not to give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that, because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all fours. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and gunned it, right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. Behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek, like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look, as I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. There I picked up speed, and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light. The clock read 2:03 AM as I drove down the deserted road, the only illumination coming from the dim headlights of my car. The air was still and quiet, with no sounds except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. My mind was foggy, and my head throbbed painfully from the effects of the numerous drinking games we'd played throughout the night with my friends. The inside of the car was stuffy and warm, and I could feel the sweat gathering on my forehead. I knew I needed something to help with the headache that was slowly taking over, so I reached for the glove box in a desperate attempt to find any medication I could get my hands on. I rummaged through the cluttered contents of the glove box, my fingers blindly searching through the mess, but to no avail. I cursed under my breath, frustrated that I couldn't find anything to relieve my pain. With a heavy sigh, I resigned myself to the fact that I had to power through the headache and continue driving, hoping that I would reach home safely. As I drove down the winding road, my headlights caught a glimpse of movement on the side of the road. Intrigued, I slowed down and steered closer to investigate. That's when I saw her. A woman, standing by the edge of the road, her silhouette illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlight. Her clothes were torn and ragged, and her face looked tired and worn. "Huh?" I said, my voice laced with suspicion and confusion. I couldn't help but wonder what she was doing out here alone, in the middle of the night, in such a disheveled state. As I pulled over, my headlights now fully trained on her. She turned to face me with an expression of surprise and relief. I could see now that she was indeed in her 40s, with lines etched deeply into her face, and her hair was a wild mess. Her coat was too thin for the cold night air, and her shoes were worn and scuffed. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was a spark of hope in her eyes as she stepped closer. I could feel the tension in the air as I rolled down my window, unsure of what to expect. How's it going?" I said, trying to cover the slur in my words. The woman's voice was desperate as she told me, "My car broke down 2 miles back. I could use a ride." However, as I looked around, I began to feel doubtful about her story, since I hadn't seen any car in need of assistance on the road while I was driving. Given my hangover, I dismissed it as a false perception and didn't dwell on it. "Where you headed?" "Just to the motel down the street." Though I hesitated at first, I decided to let her in. The thought of leaving someone stranded on the side of the road was too much for my conscience to bear. I opened my car door and she quickly sat in the passenger seat. Immediately, I was hit with a horrible stench, like a rotting animal, causing me to roll down the window to alleviate the smell. As I resumed driving, I couldn't help but feel the tension in the air, making every passing moment feel longer and more uncomfortable. To ease the tension, I said, "How long have you been on the road?" To my surprise, she didn't respond. I glanced over at her and noticed that she was staring blankly out the window, her eyes fixed on the passing scenery. I repeated my question, but still she remained silent, and her responsiveness only added to the growing sense of unease that I felt. Though uncomfortable, I continued driving. 7 minutes passed, and she still hadn't said a word, just staring out the window. I could see a motel about 4 miles down the road, so I asked her, hoping for a response. "Is this it, right here?" Her voice was shaky as she responded with a yes. I glanced over at her once more, and was surprised to find her staring directly into my eyes. Shocked, I quickly looked away. I was at the peak of my unease at this point. I could hear the sound of metal coming from her direction. I quickly turned my head to look over at her, and much to my surprise I could see that she was holding a pocket knife. I immediately stopped the car and tried to get out, but I forgot to unlock the door. I knew what was about to happen. She yelled while simultaneously slashing the base of my neck. Pain shot through my body as I desperately tried to defend myself from the sudden attack. As I struggled to keep control of the car, I could feel warm blood trickling down my neck. The woman continued her assault, her eyes filled with a wild, frenzied look. Despite my efforts to fight back, the pain and blood loss were too much, and soon, everything went black as I succumbed to my injuries. It's late when you finish your shift. The inky night seems to almost suffocate you as you step out the building. Your car is one of the only few in the parking lot, along with a busted sedan to the far left. You think you see it moving, jerking slightly. It doesn't have any license plates. Did the trunk just move? You curse the darkness as the only street lamp in front of the building flickers. If only you could get a better look. No. You shake your head, rationalizing that it's just your tiredness. Real life isn't like a story. And even if it were, sleep is more important right now. Suppressing the guilt from such a selfish mentality, you start driving. It's only you out here on this lonely road. You curse yourself for never moving to that city you swore you would. You never accomplished those goals. At least a job closer to your home would have helped, but you were desperate and willing to drive an hour for $5 more. Times were hard. Times are hard. You're too lost in your thoughts to notice that a truck has pulled up. It's old, worn, the rusty red paint chipped and peeling into the night as it speeds behind you. The high beams take up your rear view and leave you like a deer in the headlights as it follows your every turn. Goosebumps prickle your arms. You instantly think of everyone slaughtered in a rural town. Of all the fear and the mothers on interviews sobbing that they never got to say goodbye. You make a left. It makes a left. You remember another story then, of that one driver with the high beams saving that vulnerable girl. But real life isn't like a story. The driver of this truck isn't even trying to switch off their high beams. It's also closer. Too close. So close you think that any more and they'll clip your car. You've heard of it before. Serial killers forcing their victims into an accident to get them. I'm sorry, they'll say. Can you check? Before plunging a knife the moment their back is turned. Almost home, you think, dredging the last lonely stretch of deserted road before you get to your street. Almost home. The feared dark road stretches on ahead. You brace yourself for having to run, already practicing how to take your keys out the ignition and sprinting up your driveway. But before you can, the truck takes the last exit to the left. You look at it, wide-eyed before laughing. You don't know why, you just laugh. Peals of laughter that you didn't think you were capable of for the longest time. You pull over to catch your breath, nervous laugh still escaping your lips as the sheer relief floods you. Real life really isn't at all like the stories. So, there's no one around to save you when a heavy hand grips your shoulder.